I woke up to 17 missed calls. All from my mom. My heart skipped. Something had to be wrong. She never called this much, not unless it was an emergency. With shaky fingers, I unlocked my phone. The text started flooding in before I could even process the call log. Sarah, I need $10,000 or I'm done for. They're taking the house. I'll be homeless. I sat up straight in bed, the kind of panic only a daughter feels when she hears her mother is in danger, shot through my veins. My mom, Linda, had always been dramatic, sure, but this felt different. This sounded desperate. I called her back immediately. She picked up on the first ring, her voice cracking through choked sobs. "Oh, honey. I didn't want to scare you, but I had no choice," she gasped between breaths. "The bank, they're coming after me. They'll lock me out of the house. I don't know what to do. You're my only hope." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, trying to think straight. I was still half asleep, but her fear bled through the line. It sounded real. And real or not, it was my mother. She raised me alone after the divorce, always telling me that we were a team, just the two of us. Dad had his new life in Colorado, and my little brother Jake was off at college, still too young to help. It was always me she turned to. I was the responsible one. The strong one. The reliable one. "Mom, $10,000 is a lot of money," I whispered, my voice catching. "What happened? I thought you were okay last month." Silence. Then more tears. "I tried everything, sweetheart. I swear." The mortgage payments piled up. The credit cards. I got in over my head. And now it's too late. If I don't pay by Friday, I'm out on the street. Please, Sarah. Please. I stared at the dark ceiling of my apartment in Austin, my chest tightening. I had spent the last 3 years pinching every penny, working overtime shifts, eating ramen for weeks, all to save enough for a down payment on my first home. That account, my future, held exactly $12,400. If I gave her $10,000, it would set me back at least 2 more years. But what was I supposed to do? Let my mother end up homeless? Tears welled in my eyes. I pictured her standing outside her house in Las Vegas, clutching her purse, watching strangers throw her things onto the lawn. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. "I'll send it," I whispered. "But, Mom, I need this back. I'm not rich. I can't." "You'll get it back, baby. Every cent. I promise," she cut in quickly. Her voice lifted, lighter, relieved. "You're saving me, Sarah. You're saving my life. I love you so much." I transferred the money that night. Every dollar of it. When the confirmation popped up on my screen, my chest felt heavy, but there was also a strange warmth. I had done the right thing. I had protected my mom. That's what daughters do. A week later, everything changed. I was on my lunch break, scrolling mindlessly through Facebook, when a photo made me freeze. There she was, my mom, lounging by the pool at Bellagio in Las Vegas, oversized sunglasses on, holding a cocktail, the caption glowing beneath the image. "Best weekend ever." I stared at it, heart racing. My first thought was, no. This can't be right. I zoomed in like that would make it make sense. Maybe it was an old picture? Maybe someone hacked her account? Maybe. But then came the next photo, her laughing with friends at a blackjack table. Another one, holding a designer shopping bag. Each picture like a slap to my face. I texted her immediately. My fingers could barely keep up with my anger. "What the hell is this?" A few minutes later, the reply came, casual, almost dismissive. "Relax, honey. You'll survive. Don't be so uptight." I stared at the screen, blood rushing to my ears. Survive? I had just emptied my entire savings account. For her. Survive? The woman who raised me, who said we were a team, had taken my future and turned it into a weekend of poolside drinks and designer handbags. I felt sick. Betrayed. But more than anything, I felt stupid. Because this wasn't the first time. Not really. There had been other times, smaller amounts, smaller lies, but I always excused it. Because it was my mom. Because I loved her. But this time was different. This time it was $10,000. This time it was my future. I clenched my jaw, thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call her and let her hear the rage she had just unlocked inside me. But I didn't. Instead, I put my phone down, stared at my reflection in the dark screen, and made a decision. She thought she won. She thought I'd just let this go. She had no idea what was coming. What would you have done? Would you have let it go? Or would you have fought back? Comment 111 if you think I was being treated unfairly. I didn't sleep that night. After seeing my mom's photos from Las Vegas, sipping cocktails by the pool, laughing at a blackjack table, posing with designer shopping bags, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My body was still, but my mind raced. Anger, disbelief, humiliation, they swirled together in a tight knot in my chest. I thought back to that desperate phone call, the sound of her voice cracking through tears, the fear that I might be the only person standing between my mother and the street. And now this? My future, $10,000 I had spent 3 years saving, scraping together dollar by dollar, had been blown away in a weekend of indulgence. But this wasn't just about the money. It was about everything that led up to it. I wish I could say this was the first time. That this was the moment I realized my mother, Linda, was capable of manipulating me. But the truth? That realization had been trying to claw its way into my heart for years. I just kept pushing it down, because she was my mom. And moms don't do this to their children, right? But mine did. Over and over. I was 20 when my parents divorced. It wasn't a clean break, it was ugly. My dad, John, a hard-working plumber from Denver, had finally had enough. After years of trying to hold things together, he packed his bags and walked out the door. He never said it outright, but I knew why. My mom's spending habits had bled him dry. She chased a lifestyle that didn't match our reality: designer clothes, expensive wine tastings, spontaneous trips to California. And when the credit card bills came, it was always someone else's fault. Dad was exhausted. I was angry. But my mom? She made herself the victim. He abandoned us, Sarah. He left me to figure this out alone. We have to stick together now. It's you and me, honey. We'll get through this. I believed her. I was 20, still in college, working part-time at a bookstore. But I dropped everything to help. I picked up a second job at a coffee shop, waking up at 4:30 every morning to open the store, then rushing to class, then heading straight to my evening shift. When rent was short, I paid it. When my younger brother, Jake, needed books for school, I covered it. When mom's car broke down, I maxed out my credit card. I stretched myself so thin I barely recognized my own life. But every time I started to feel like I was drowning, she would say it again. It's just us, sweetheart. We have to take care of each other. I clung to those words. I told myself this was what family did. But there were cracks. Moments I tried to ignore. Like the time in 2019. I was working late when she called, frantic. Sarah, I lost my wallet. Everything's gone. My cash, my cards, I can't pay the bills this month. Can you help me? I didn't even think. I went to the bank the next day and took out a $3,000 personal loan. I wired it to her immediately. She was so grateful, so relieved. But 2 weeks later, I saw a picture pop up on Facebook. My mom, lounging at a spa in Palm Springs, cucumber slices over her eyes. The caption read, "Self-care is everything." I felt my stomach drop. But when I asked her about it, she laughed it off. "Oh, honey, it was a gift from a friend. Don't be so serious all the time." I believed her. Or maybe I needed to believe her. Then there was 2021. Her car was falling apart, she said. Repairs would cost $2,500. I was saving for my future, but she needed me. So, I paid. A month later, she posted photos from Napa Valley, wine glass in hand, standing beside rolling vineyards. That was work-related, she told me when I confronted her. Networking event. These things are important for my career. She didn't have a career. She had part-time gigs that barely covered her personal expenses. But I let it go. Because I loved her. So when she called me last week, sobbing about the house, I didn't question it. I pushed away the warning bells in my head, the ones that whispered, "Remember Palm Springs. Remember Napa. Remember all the times before." I told myself this time was different. That this was serious. That I wasn't just saving my mother's house, I was saving her dignity. But I was wrong. I stared at my phone that night, scrolling back through our messages. Her "I love you, sweetheart" hit differently now. It felt like a transaction. A performance. Had it always been like that? I thought about all the sacrifices I made for her, missed nights out with friends because I had to pick up an extra shift, wearing the same worn-out sneakers for 2 years because I was helping pay bills, watching my college friends celebrate their first apartments while I was still living paycheck to paycheck. For what? For a woman who saw me as her personal safety net? Her bank account with a heartbeat? I felt the tears build behind my eyes. Not just from anger, but grief. Because the mother I wanted, the mother I thought I had, didn't exist. I wanted someone who would protect me. Someone who would lift me up. Someone who would put my future above her fleeting pleasures. But instead, I was her provider. Her enabler. I was exhausted. Lying there, I wondered, how many other people know this feeling? How many of you have given everything to someone you love, only to realize they saw you as nothing more than a resource? How many of you have had your heart shattered, not by a stranger, but by your own family? Comment 222 if you've ever felt used by someone you trusted. I closed my eyes, but sleep never came. All I could see was her, smiling by that pool in Las Vegas, holding a drink paid for with my future. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The anger that had simmered beneath my skin for days, since that first sickening moment I saw my mother grinning by the pool in Las Vegas, finally erupted. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears, and pressed call. Her name, **mom***, flashed across the screen. She picked up on the second ring, voice breezy, almost cheerful, like she had been expecting me. "Hey, sweetheart," she chimed, as though we were catching up over coffee. I didn't even bother with pleasantries. My voice came out low, tight, sharper than I intended. "Mom, what the hell is going on? You told me you were going to lose the house. You said you needed the money. And now you're in Vegas?" There was a pause. Then, a chuckle. A goddamn chuckle. "Oh, honey, don't be so dramatic," she said, her tone laced with condescension. "Sometimes a woman just needs to unwind. You know how stressful things have been for me. You're always so uptight about money. Relax. You'll survive. Relax. You'll survive." That phrase hit like a slap. It echoed through my head, louder than her voice on the line. My throat tightened. "You lied to me," I said, my voice cracking. "You took my savings, $10,000, money I've worked for 3 years to save. You begged me, crying, saying you'd be homeless. And you spent it on, what? Margaritas by the pool?" She sighed, bored. "Sarah, I'll pay you back. Why are you making this such a big deal? You have a good job. You're doing fine. This was just a little escape." I needed it. I felt my vision blur with tears, not from sadness, but from the pure, blinding rage boiling inside me. This wasn't the woman who raised me. Or maybe it was, and I had just never seen it this clearly before. You needed it? I hissed. I needed that money to put a down payment on a home. That was my future. And you lied. You manipulated me, like you always do. I'm done, Mom. The line went quiet. For a moment, I thought she hung up. But then, her voice shifted, harder, colder. After everything I've done for you? I raised you by myself. I worked my ass off to give you a life. And now you're throwing that back in my face over a few dollars? A few dollars. 10,000. I didn't respond. My chest felt tight, like my lungs couldn't expand all the way. Whatever, Sarah. You'll get your money back eventually. I'm not having this conversation with you if you're going to be disrespectful. Click. She hung up. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air. I didn't know whether to scream or sob. I felt like doing both. That night, I stared at the ceiling, the room dark except for the soft glow of my phone on the nightstand. Sleep didn't come. Anger kept me awake, but beneath it was something worse, shame. How had I let this happen again? How had I been so stupid? Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Aunt Carol. I hesitated, then picked up. Her voice was gentle, but there was tension beneath it. Sarah. I saw your mom's posts, she began carefully. I wasn't going to say anything, but I think you should know. Last year, she did the same thing to me. My stomach dropped. She called me, Carol continued, voice trembling slightly, said she needed $15,000 to avoid getting evicted. She was desperate, Sarah. I wired her the money that night. I thought I was saving her. Tears welled in my eyes. She spent it at the casino, Carol whispered. A week later, she posted pictures from the Bellagio. I confronted her, she said it was none of my business. We haven't spoken since. My heart was racing. You're not the only one, Carol said quietly. She's done this before. A lot. My blood turned cold. How many times? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. But, your dad told me she did something similar back when you were a teenager. That's why he finally left. It wasn't just about the spending. It was the lies. The gambling. Gambling. The word hit me like a brick to the chest. I sat up, gripping the phone tighter. She's addicted, Sarah, Carol said. She always has been. I couldn't breathe. Every memory started clicking into place, the emergencies, the lost wallets, the repairs that never happened, the spontaneous trips. This wasn't carelessness. This was addiction. And I'd been feeding it. I hung up the phone and sat there in the dark, shaking. For years, I had justified every lie, every betrayal, because she was my mother. I told myself she needed me. I told myself I was helping. But I wasn't helping. I was enabling. I was her bank. Her safety net. Her last resort when the casino lights got too dim and the losses piled too high. And I was done. I needed her to face the truth. But more than that, I needed to protect myself. I opened my laptop, hands trembling, and started searching. Small claims court. Bank statements. Transfer receipts. I pulled up the text messages. The photos. Everything. I created a folder, Mom, $10,000. I didn't want to do this. But I had to. I thought back to that last phone call, her voice dripping with mockery. Relax. You'll survive. No. This time, I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to fight back. Have you ever reached a point where you realized that loving someone wasn't enough? That sometimes, the only way to protect yourself is to let them go? Comment 333 if you think it's time I stood up for myself. I woke up the next morning with a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't shake. The call with Aunt Carol echoed in my mind, the $15,000, the casino, the broken relationship. The reality of my mother's gambling addiction was settling in, but it felt like my heart was still fighting against it. A part of me wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding. That maybe this time was different. That maybe she'd call and apologize. But she didn't. The only notification on my phone was a new Facebook post, my mom smiling with a daiquiri in hand, captioned, "Living my best life." That was the moment the grief turned to clarity. I had spent years telling myself I was helping her, saving her. But I realized now, I wasn't saving her. I was drowning alongside her. Every time I gave in to her pleas, I kept her afloat just long enough for her to dive back into the same destructive cycle. I was done being her safety net. So, I got to work. The first thing I did was open my banking app. I scrolled back through every transfer I had ever made to her. $3,000 in 2019. $2,500 in 2021. And now, the $10,000, the one that finally broke me. I took screenshots of every transaction, every timestamp. I saved them all into a folder on my laptop titled, "Mom, Financial Records." Next, I scrolled through her social media. The posts from Vegas were still there, but I went further back. I found pictures from Palm Springs the same week she told me she'd lost her wallet in 2019. The Napa Valley wine trip when she said her car was in the shop. I saved every image, every smug smile, every cocktail in hand. Then I scrolled through our text messages, the frantic requests, the guilt trips, the promises to pay me back. But it was her last message that stung the most, "Relax, honey. You'll survive." I screenshotted that too. I sat back, staring at my screen, heart racing. This wasn't just anger. This was preparation. I didn't want revenge, I wanted freedom. But part of me wondered, how many of you have had to gather evidence against your own parent? How many of you had to choose between protecting your heart and protecting your future? Comment 444 if you know what it's like to reach your breaking point. I wasn't done. I needed advice. Real advice. Not the kind that came from late-night Google searches. So, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in nearly 2 years. "Hello?" His voice was deeper than I remembered, more tired. "Dad, it's me." Silence. Then, a slow exhale. "Sarah." I hadn't spoken to him since the last Christmas I spent at his place in Denver. Things had always been strained after the divorce. He'd tried to warn me about Mom, but I had clung to her version of the story. I believed she needed me. That he had abandoned us. But now, I needed him. "I know I haven't called," I said, voice trembling. "But, you were right. About Mom. She took $10,000 from me last week. Lied. Spent it in Vegas." I expected anger. Or maybe an "I told you so." But all I heard was sadness. "She's been doing this for decades, Sarah," he said quietly. "I fought it for years. I tried to fix it, but she doesn't want to be fixed. I left because I had to. Otherwise, she would have taken everything from me." His words cut deeper than I expected. "She's your mother. And you love her. But you can't let her destroy you too," he said. "You deserve better than this." I wiped away a tear before it could fall. "What do I do, Dad?" "You get your money back," he said firmly. "And you protect yourself from now on." I hung up feeling both lighter and heavier. I knew what I had to do next. I found a local attorney who specialized in small claims cases. I booked a consultation for the next day. When I walked into his office, I felt like I was betraying my own blood. But I knew this wasn't about punishment, it was about setting boundaries. I explained everything, the lies, the gambling, the $10,000. He listened carefully, then nodded. "This is a textbook small claims case," he said. "You have evidence. You have proof of payment. You have her text admitting she took the money. You'll win." Hearing those words gave me a flicker of hope. "But Sarah," he added, "winning doesn't mean she'll pay willingly. People like your mom, they fight dirty. You need to be prepared for that." I nodded, already knowing he was right. When I left his office, I filed the claim online that night. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. The final step was the hardest. I called my little brother, Jake. He was still in college, still holding on to the version of mom that I had clung to for years, the one who needed protecting. "Hey, Sarah," he answered, surprised. "What's up?" I hesitated. "Jake. I need to talk to you about mom." There was a long pause. "I know," he said quietly. "She's borrowed money from me too. A few times. Not as much as you, but it's bad, right?" I felt my heart break for him. He was only 22, and already he was carrying the weight I had carried for years. "I'm taking her to small claims court," I said. "For the $10,000. I need you to know. In case she tries to twist it." He sighed. "She'll flip out. But maybe it's time. I'm tired, Sarah. I'm so tired." So was I. We stayed on the phone for an hour, talking about everything, our childhood, the times we laughed, the times we cried. The times we thought she was a hero. And the times we realized she wasn't. When I hung up, I felt stronger. Not because I had a legal case. But because, for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I had my brother. I had my dad. And I had myself. The claim was filed. The evidence was collected. I was ready. But I knew my mother. And I knew this fight was far from over. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you love, knowing it might destroy the relationship forever? Would you have the strength to choose yourself? Comment 444 if you're ready to see how this all plays out. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm I had seen forming on the horizon for weeks. No matter how prepared I felt, no matter how many sleepless nights I had spent gathering evidence, consulting my lawyer, and replaying every lie she had ever told me, nothing could have readied me for the weight in my chest as I walked into that small courtroom in downtown Austin. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale paper, the kind of place where lives got reduced to case numbers and settlements. I clutched the folder containing everything, the bank transfers, the screenshots of my mother's smug texts, the photos from Las Vegas. Proof that the woman who had once held my hand when I was afraid of the dark had become someone I barely recognized. Someone I could no longer trust. I sat down at the petitioner's table, heart thudding so loudly I wondered if the clerk could hear it. My lawyer leaned over and whispered, "Just stick to the facts. We've got this." I nodded, though my palms were damp, and my throat felt like sandpaper. Then she walked in. Late, of course. Linda swept into the courtroom like it was a goddamn runway. Large sunglasses, Versace, or at least a convincing knockoff, perched dramatically on her face. A Louis Vuitton bag, likely fake, dangled from her wrist. She was wearing heels that clicked obnoxiously on the tile floor, and a beige suit that screamed expensive, though I knew better. I had learned by now, everything about her was a carefully constructed facade. But what hit me the hardest wasn't the outfit, it was the look. That smirk. That infuriating, unapologetic smirk that said, "I'm untouchable. You wouldn't dare." She didn't even glance at me as she slid into her seat at the respondent's table. Instead, she adjusted her sunglasses, as if shielding herself from the glare of truth. The judge entered. The room stood. My heart raced. This was it. We began. My lawyer presented our case. The $10,000 bank transfer. The frantic texts from my mother, pleading, desperate, claiming she was days from being homeless. The screenshots of her Facebook posts from Las Vegas, cocktails, poolside smiles, poker tables. The final message, relax, honey. You'll survive. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer, driving nails into the illusion she had spent years building. I watched my mother's expression shift, subtle at first. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers gripped the strap of her bag a little harder. She fidgeted, crossing and uncrossing her legs. The smirk was gone. When the judge looked over his glasses and asked if she had any defense, she finally removed the sunglasses. Her eyes were red, not from tears, but from anger. She started with denial. It was a misunderstanding, she said, voice trembling but defiant. She's blowing this out of proportion. I was stressed, I needed a break. I told her I would pay her back. This is just family drama. Family drama. I clenched my fists beneath the table. The judge raised a hand, silencing her. Do you have proof of any intention to repay this loan? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Silence. The judge's gavel felt like thunder when it hit the desk. The court finds in favor of the petitioner. Linda Parker is ordered to repay her daughter, Sarah Parker, the sum of $10,000. It was over. Or so I thought. The moment we stepped outside the courtroom, everything unraveled. I had barely taken a breath when I heard her voice, louder than necessary, cutting through the hallway like a blade. You ungrateful little bitch. I turned, and there she was, face flushed, eyes wild. You did this to your own mother? Over money? After everything I've done for you? Her voice cracked, drawing the attention of others in the hallway, attorneys, petitioners, strangers, watching our family come apart at the seams. Tears welled in my eyes, but I stood firm. You lied to me, I said, my voice low but steady. You stole from me. This was never about the money, Mom. It was about trust. And you broke it. She stepped closer, finger jabbing the air between us. I gave you life, she spat. You don't sue your mother. What kind of daughter are you? Her words were sharp, meant to cut deep, but this time, they didn't. Because I saw her clearly now. Not as the woman who tucked me in at night. Not as the mother who made pancakes in funny shapes when I was little. This was a woman trapped by her own choices, her own addiction, lashing out because she had finally lost control over me. I took a breath, looked her dead in the eyes, and said the words I had been too afraid to say my entire life. You don't get to use me anymore. Her face contorted, shock, anger, maybe even pain. But I turned and walked away before she could respond. My lawyer patted my shoulder. You did good. But it didn't feel good. Not exactly. There was no rush of triumph. Just a strange, aching emptiness. Like I had won, but lost something at the same time. That night, she called me 8 times. Each voicemail a different tactic, rage, guilt, bargaining. The last one was quiet. I'm your mother, Sarah. I love you. You didn't have to do this. I deleted them all. Because love isn't supposed to feel like debt. It isn't supposed to come with receipts. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved because staying meant losing yourself? Have you ever stood your ground, knowing it would break your heart? Comment 555 if you believe sometimes the hardest choices are the right ones. The check arrived in the mail 3 weeks after the ruling. It was a plain white envelope, no note, no apology, just my mother's handwriting on the front, slanted and rushed like she couldn't wait to get it out of her hands. The return address was hers, though I knew she hadn't written it from home. She was probably at a friend's house, or maybe parked outside a casino, scrawling my name while the slot machines inside sang their tempting chorus. I sat at my kitchen table, the check for $10,000 resting in my palm. It felt heavier than paper should. This wasn't just money. It was 3 years of overtime shifts, skipped vacations, and saying no to things I wanted, just so I could say yes to her. It was the price of my peace. And now it was back in my hands. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt relief. But what I felt was tired. Have you ever won a fight you never wanted to have in the first place? Have you ever looked at the person you love and realized you had to protect yourself from them? Comment 666 if you believe that sometimes, choosing yourself is the strongest thing a woman can do. I deposited the check that afternoon. I thought about using the drive-thru, just sliding it through the metal tray and getting it over with. But I went inside instead. Maybe I needed to see it, this final step. The teller, a young woman with a warm smile, processed the deposit quickly. Anything else I can help you with today? I wanted to say, yes. Can you help me get my mother back? Can you help me erase the nights I lay awake wondering if I was cruel for asking for what was mine? Can you help me stop feeling like a child who let their parent down? But instead, I just shook my head. No, that's all. Thank you. The money hit my account 2 days later. I stared at the screen, $10,000. It was mine again. But it wasn't the same. This money didn't represent the dream it once did. It wasn't a stepping stone to a better future, it was a reminder of everything it had cost me to reclaim it. But I wasn't going to let it sit there like a scar. The next morning, I met with a realtor. We walked through a small condo in East Austin, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Or, it would be. I ran my fingers over the kitchen counter, imagining morning coffee in my own space. I stepped onto the tiny balcony and pictured myself reading there as the sun set. I saw a future, one I built, one I protected. When I handed over the down payment, I felt something lift inside me. This wasn't just about property. This was about reclaiming my life. A week later, I got a text from my dad. Proud of you, kiddo. Simple. No lecture. No reminder of how he had seen it coming. Just pride. I stared at those words for a long time, letting them sink in. Sometimes, we spend so much time chasing the approval of people who will never give it that we forget there are others, quietly, patiently, hoping we'll see our own worth. I called him that night. We talked about my condo, his latest home repair project, the weather in Denver. It was small talk, but it felt bigger than that. It felt like I was letting him back in. Like maybe, for the first time, we were meeting each other as adults, both of us a little weathered, a little wiser. My mother called 2 days later. Her name lit up my phone screen, and my chest tightened out of habit. I let it ring. A voicemail came through. Her voice was softer than it had been outside the courthouse. Hi, sweetheart. I just wanted to check in. See how you're doing. I miss you. Call me when you can. I didn't call back. She called again the next week. Then the week after that. Each time, her voice was gentler, like she was testing the waters, trying to see if I was still the daughter who would bend, who would break. But I wasn't that daughter anymore. I thought I'd feel guilt ignoring her, but what I felt was freedom. Boundaries are strange things. We're told that love means saying yes, yes to forgiveness, yes to sacrifice, yes to second and third and 50th chances. But sometimes, the deepest love we can give, to ourselves, and even to the people we love, is a firm, unshakable no. No, you don't get to lie to me. No, you don't get to take from me. No, you don't get to treat my kindness like a bank you can drain. I love my mother. I always will. But loving her doesn't mean losing myself. I chose me. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I moved into my condo 2 months later. The walls were bare at first, but they were mine. The floors creaked a little, but they were mine. I bought second-hand furniture, carried boxes up the stairs alone, and hung photos of the life I was rebuilding, on my terms. One afternoon, I found a small wooden sign at a flea market. It made me laugh out loud right there in the aisle. I bought it without hesitation and hung it right by my front door. No refunds for bad decisions. Every time I see it, I'm reminded of the hardest lesson I've ever learned. Sometimes, the people we love the most will hurt us the deepest. Sometimes, the hardest person to stand up to is family. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is walk away. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you love, even when it hurt? Have you ever had to choose your future over your past? Comment 666 if you believe that women who stand their ground will always win in the end. Looking back now, I realize that this story, my story, isn't just about $10,000. It's not even about my mother's gambling addiction, or the lies, or the hurt. It's about something far deeper. It's about learning when love becomes a weapon. When the people you trust the most start using your heart as leverage. When helping someone you love slowly turns into sacrificing pieces of yourself, your peace, your future, until there's almost nothing left. I know my story isn't unique. There are so many of us, sons, daughters, siblings, spouses, who have stood in that same painful place. We tell ourselves we're being good people, good family members, by giving and forgiving. We think we're showing love. But real love? Real love doesn't demand we destroy ourselves. Real love doesn't see our kindness as a weakness to exploit. What I've learned, the hardest, most valuable lesson of my life, is this. Loving someone doesn't mean you let them hurt you. Loving someone doesn't mean you let them take from you. Sometimes, the kindest, strongest thing you can say is, no. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you've stopped caring. It means you finally care about yourself too. And that's okay. It took me years to realize that I deserved more than being my mother's safety net. That I deserved a future built on my own terms. And the day I said enough, the day I chose myself, that was the day I truly found freedom. Maybe you're listening to this right now, and it feels familiar. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're still there. I want you to know, you are not alone. I know how hard it is to walk away. I know how guilty you feel when you stop answering those calls, when you stop writing those checks. But you deserve peace. You deserve to build a life that's yours. And if you've ever been in that position, if you've ever had to choose yourself over someone you love, share your story. Tell me in the comments. Let others know they're not alone. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect your future? Have you ever had to say no, even when it broke your heart? I want to hear from you. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the weight of love turned into obligation, share this video. Someone out there needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like this, real stories, from people like you, stories that remind us we are stronger than we think. Because at the end of the day, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival.